Trump orders 100k undocumented immigrants out of Section 8 housing. Today, we're talking about a major policy move from President Trump, an executive order that's set to remove undocumented immigrants from Section 8 housing programs. This has been making headlines, with estimates suggesting it could impact around 100,000 people. We'll break it down step by step, using reliable sources, and look at the broader implications without any bias. Let's get started. First, a quick refresher. What is Section 8? It's a federal program run by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that helps low-income families afford housing by subsidizing rent payments to private landlords. Eligible households pay about 30% of their income toward rent, and the government covers the rest. Importantly, undocumented immigrants have never been directly eligible for these benefits, but mixed-status families where some members are citizens or legal residents can sometimes qualify if the subsidy is prorated for eligible members only. Trump's first term to 2025. This is an entirely new territory for Trump. During his first administration, there were similar efforts to tighten rules on public benefits for immigrants. Now, in 2025, he's revisited this with an executive order titled Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Open Borders, signed on February 19th. The order directs federal agencies, including HUD, to ensure that no taxpayer funds go toward housing undocumented individuals. It emphasizes preventing public benefits from acting as a magnet for illegal immigration. HUD has launched a crackdown, instructing housing authorities to verify immigration status more rigorously and evict those who don't qualify. Key details from the order. Agencies must block undocumented immigrants from accessing any federal public benefits, including housing subsidies. It requires stricter enforcement in programs like Section 8, potentially leading to evictions for non-compliant households. This builds on broader immigration policies, like increased deportations and workforce restrictions. Now, about that 100,000 figure, reports indicate this policy could lead to the removal of around 100,000 undocumented individuals from subsidized housing units. This estimate comes from analyses of mixed-status families currently in the program. For context, losing housing access could heighten risks for these families, including increased vulnerability to immigration enforcement. It's worth noting that the order doesn't change the law. Overnight implementation will involve reviews by local housing authorities. Let's look at both sides fairly. Supporters argue this saves taxpayer money and prioritizes housing aid for U.S. citizens and legal residents, especially amid a national housing shortage. They say it discourages illegal immigration by removing incentives. On the other hand, critics point out potential humanitarian concerns, like family separations in mixed-status households or increased homelessness. Groups like the National Immigration Law Center highlight that it could intimidate eligible families from seeking help they qualify for. Economically, some studies suggest immigrants contribute significantly to the workforce and economy, so disruptions could have ripple effects. What happens next? HUD is rolling out guidance to states, with compliance deadlines likely in the coming months. Affected families may have options like appeals or relocation assistance, but details are still emerging. Keep an eye on official updates from HUD or the White House for the latest. Trump takes second swing at cutting housing assistance for immigrants. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, under the direction of Donald Trump's renewed deportation and immigration enforcement agenda, is preparing a controversial rule change that could strip thousands of families of access to public housing and rental assistance. The policy, aimed squarely at mixed-status households, those with both undocumented and legally present members, has ignited widespread alarm among housing advocates, immigrant rights groups, and local housing authorities. Revisiting an old battle. This proposal revisits a contentious idea first pushed by the Trump administration in 2019. At the time, HUD sought to ban mixed-status families from federally subsidized housing, despite the long-standing rule that already prorated benefits, so only eligible members received aid. Housing advocates, legal groups, and city housing authorities mobilized quickly, generating more than 30,000 public comments, 95% of them opposed. The plan was ultimately abandoned as the COVID-19 pandemic and Trump's electoral defeat shifted priorities. Now, the administration appears ready to resume that fight, with the proposed rule currently under review at the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. Unlike last time, however, advocates fear the process could move much faster, especially with reports that HUD is experimenting with artificial intelligence to accelerate regulatory review. The scale of impact. According to HUD's earlier estimates, a rule of this nature could affect more than 25,000 households, totaling 108,000 people, including over 55,000 children, many of whom are U.S. citizens. Families in California, Texas, and New York, particularly in immigrant-heavy cities like Los Angeles and New York City, would be hit hardest. The consequences would ripple beyond displaced families. Because mixed-status households pay higher rent contributions due to prorated benefits, their eviction would deprive housing agencies of an estimated $200 million annually. For already underfunded agencies, such as the New York City Housing Authority and the Housing Authority of Los Angeles, this would deepen budget shortfalls and further degrade living conditions. Political framing and conservative push. Conservative leaders, including Trump Vice President J.D. Vance and Representatives Jim Jordan and Tom McClintock, argue that undocumented immigrants strain limited housing resources and should not benefit from federal programs. They claim stricter rules would shorten waiting lists for citizens. Yet housing experts dispute this framing. They emphasize that immigrants are essential to the construction workforce and that housing shortages stem from systemic underinvestment, not from immigrant families in public housing. Evicting mixed-status households, they warn, will only fuel homelessness, housing instability, and family separations. Advocacy and opposition. Groups such as the National Housing Law Project, People's Action, and community organizers nationwide are preparing legal and grassroots campaigns to block the rule. They argue the policy is not just punitive but deeply counterproductive, destabilizing communities without addressing the real causes of the affordable housing crisis. As NHLP's Deborah Thrope warned, the result will be mass terminations of programs, evictions, housing instability, and homelessness. Advocates also highlight the heightened fear this policy creates for undocumented residents, especially given HUD's past information sharing agreements with the Department of Homeland Security that could expose families to deportation. What lies ahead? The rule is not yet finalized, but housing advocates fear this time the clock won't run out before implementation, as it did in 2019. A drawn-out review process could allow space for public comment, legal challenges, and congressional pressure, but the partisan makeup of Congress makes intervention unlikely. In the meantime, families remain in limbo, bracing for potential displacement. For immigrant rights groups and housing advocates, the renewed fight against HUD's proposed rule represents not only defense of housing access, but also a broader battle over family unity, fairness, and the future of U.S. immigration policy. That is all for today in this video. What are your thoughts on this? Please let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching the entire video. Hopefully, the information is useful to you. See you later in the next video. Till then, take care.
Trump orders 100k undocumented immigrants out of Section 8 housing. President Donald Trump has ignited a controversial battle over housing assistance by issuing an executive order ending taxpayer subsidization of open borders, targeting undocumented immigrants in a federally subsidized housing. The policy primarily impacts mixed-status families, households with both citizens, legal residents, and undocumented members who currently receive a prorated Section 8 benefits. Estimates suggest the route could displace over 1 lakh people, including 55,000 children, many of them U.S. citizens. Supporters argue the move protects taxpayer funds, reduces incentives for illegal immigration, and frees up resources for citizens and a housing shortage. Critics, however, warn of family separation, homelessness, and community destabilization, while also noting the economic losses to housing agencies, which could total $200 million annually. Housing advocates highlight that a nearly identical proposal in 2019 drew 30,000 public comments, 95% in opposition, before being shelved. Now, with HUD using stricter enforcement and possible AI-driven regulatory reviews, opponents fear rapid implementation. Advocacy groups and legal organizations are preparing court challenges and grassroots resistance framing this is not only a housing fight but also a larger struggle over immigration, family unity, and social equity.